let's say we have a server here. Let's understand why do we need the privileged session manager in the first place. Okay, let's say we have a server here. Let's call it um, a Windows server. Okay, let's say we have a Windows server. Okay. Within this Windows server, we have an account called administrator account. Okay. Password is XYZ. You have an account called administrator. Password is XYZ. The problem with this particular account, this is the most sensitive account within this is the most powerful account, and since it is a powerful account, it can be used to log into the system and do all the tasks that the user wants. So basically, delete any users, create any new users, upgrade the OS, patchings, right? All the kind of modifications can be done if you are logged in with this particular administrator account. This is a very powerful account. The problem here is that the passwords, right now we do not have a solution implemented. The passwords are exposed to every individual that uses the account. Okay, let's understand. Let's say we have a consumer. Consumer, the passwords are directly exposed to them. Okay, they are using this administrator username and password in order to log into the target system directly. They are simply initiating an RDP connection to connect to this server. They are simply initiating an RDP connection, right? RDP connection. They are writing the IP address of the server, username, and password. Okay. So there are multiple risks here. The risks are basically the first thing, we have the passwords directly exposed. Passwords are exposed to everyone. Okay. Anyone who uses this account, okay, uh, is masking their identity to log into the server. Any task that they do, any task that they do will not be monitored. It will not be monitored. Let's say if I use this account, let's say I initiate this RDP connection client, I write the IP address, username, and password. As long as I'm using this administrator account, my individual ID will never be in the logs. Okay. Any task that I do inside the target system, let's say I remove some files from the server, or I delete something from the server, or I share some files with someone who is not authorized. Any activity that I'm not supposed to do, okay, I'll do those activities. Who is going to know that Sanjeev has performed all these activities? Because I have used this administrator account. The server logs are going to say that the activity was performed by the administrator. Okay, no one really knows that Sanjeev has used the administrator account to log into the server and did all those kind of tasks, right? So unless they track my IP address, it is not really possible for them to associate the unauthorized activities with my ID. Okay, so no one knows that I did all the activities. Everyone sees in the logs that the activity was performed by the administrator account. So no accountability there, right? No logs are being generated. No one is tracking who is using your sensitive account, your powerful accounts to log into what server at what point of time, right? There is no audit trails, no audit trails, no tracking of the activity. Apart from this, there is no accountability. Anyone can use any account and do any type of task without getting noticed. No accountability. Apart from these problems that we have one other major problem as well. Let's say if I use the remote desktop connection client and click on connect button and connect to the target system directly, connect to the target system directly, my laptop, my personal laptop is having direct interaction with the servers that contain sensitive information within the organization. Okay. My personal laptop, I'm connecting this remote desktop, connecting the target server from my personal laptop or maybe the company laptop. This is where my laptop is having direct interaction with the target server that contains sensitive information. And if any bad scripts that I have in the laptop or any malware that I have, that will be directly pushed into the target server that contains the sensitive information, right? Any malware that I have can be directly pushed to the target server that contains sensitive information. So we want to prevent this from happening. We do not want the user's laptop to have direct interaction with the target system. Okay? Because in that case, any harmful scripts in your laptop can easily be pushed into the target systems that contain sensitive information. We want to isolate the user's laptop and the target server. Okay? We want to isolate the user's laptop and the target server. This is where if you connect directly from the laptop, there is no isolation. There is no isolation. These are the use cases for privileged session manager. Okay, these are the use cases. This is why we need the privileged session manager in the first place. Right? This is why we need the privileged session manager to resolve all these problems. Right? If we connect to the servers directly, there are a lot of risks. These are the risks that we want to address with the help of privileged session manager. So let's understand how does privileged session manager solves this problem. Let's say we have the PVW here. We implemented the CyberArk architecture. So this is the PVWA. Right. We will onboard this administrator account here inside CyberArk. We will onboard this administrator account inside CyberArk. How do we onboard the account? We saw it yesterday. We onboarded PA1 account. We onboarded PA2 account. Right. So we create entry of the account inside CyberArk. Username administrator. Password is XYZ. Right. We onboarded this account inside CyberArk. As soon as we onboarded the account, since the password was exposed, we will trigger a password change in CyberArk. Okay? Let's say CyberArk triggered the password change. The new password now becomes XYZ1 here. The new password is now XYZ1. The new password is now XYZ1. CyberArk does not only changes the password on CyberArk database, it also changes the password on the target system. So since the password is now changed on the target system, no one can use the old password to log into the target system directly. Okay? Earlier they had the password exposed, they knew the password, so they were initiating the connection this way. Now that CyberArk has changed the password, no one knows the password now. Okay? No one has access to the password. Direct connections are now restricted because they do not know the password, they would not be able to establish the connection using the RDP connection client. Right? So if they don't know the password, let's say if a user has a genuine requirement to use the account to connect to the server, they are authorized, they have approval to use the privileged account. How do how do we allow them access to the privileged account? Right? Let's say we have this user here, okay, consumer. We will ask this consumer to log into the PVWA. I will ask this consumer to log into the PVWA. Yesterday we had the logins using the LDAP authentication, right? So consumer will log into the PVWA, authenticate using his ID and password. Once they are logged into the CyberArk and they have the proper accesses inside CyberArk, we will still not disclose the password to the user. Okay? This password is encrypted even in the PVWA. Yesterday we provided the retrieve permission that allowed the users to see the password, but usually we do not do that. Okay? If we have the PSM in place, usually we do not allow the users to see the password. Instead, the show button that we had on the UI yesterday will have a connect button here. Once the PSM is deployed, they'll see a connect button. They'll see a connect button, right? When they click on this connect button, when they click on this connect button, they'll have to provide an IP address where exactly they want to connect. Okay? Let's say the user provided the IP address of this particular server. The user wanted to connect to this particular server. They provided the IP address of this server. A connection will be initiated from user's laptop. Okay. This is the PWA browser opened in the user's local machine, user's laptop, right? So a connection will be initiated from user's laptop to the target system, but in this particular case, user's laptop will not be allowed to directly interact with the target system. There is a server sitting in between called privileged session manager. Okay. There is a server, a jump server sitting in between called privileged session manager. Privileged session manager. Privileged session manager basically acts as a jump server between the user's laptop and the target server. Okay. So as soon as the user clicks on the connect button, the first thing that's going to happen, a connection will be initiated to the PSM server, not the target server. The connection will be initiated to the PSM server, right? The connection will be initiated to the PSM server. Right? That's step number one. User clicks on the connect button. Instead of the connection getting established to the target server, the connection gets established to the PSM server. That's step number one. Okay. But how does the connection to the PSM server is getting established here? Because to connect to the PSM server, ultimately you need a username and password, right? How else do you connect to any server? You need a username and password. We need a username and password. So how do we connect to the PSM server here? There is a service account that is running on the backend. The service account is called PSM Connect. The service account is called PSM Connect. PSM Connect is basically an internal user slash service account. Internal user slash service account created on the vault, created locally on the PSM server. Created locally on the PSM server during the PSM installation. Responsible to establish connection to the PSM server each user session. Every single time the user clicks on the connect button, automatically the PSM Connect will initiate the connection to the privileged session manager. Automatically CyberArk will use the PSM Connect to get the session established to the PSM server. Okay. So step one, number one here. Step number one. Step number one. User clicks on the connect button. Right. PSM Connect establishes connection to the PSM server. PSM Connect establishes connection to the PSM server. Right. Step number one. User clicks on the connect button and PSM Connect establishes connection to the PSM server. Once the connection is established, right? Once the connection to the PSM server is established, from the PSM server, launching the connection to the target system are different for different set of operating system and devices. Okay, for Windows it's different processes. For Linux there is a different process. For the databases the different processes are there. But ultimately the connection client that we have, the software that is used to initiate the connection to the target system. Let's say for Windows connections you use the RDP client. Okay. For Linux connections, you use the PuTTY client. For databases, you use the Oracle client or SQL client. All those client has to be locally installed within the PSM server in order to launch them, in order to get them connected to the target system. Remote desktop connection or PuTTY client or databases or Oracle, SQL, network devices, all those client has to be locally installed within the privilege session manager. Okay. Automatically it gets installed during the PSM installation, so you do not have to worry about this. Step 1, user clicks on the connect button, IP address provided and the connection to the PSM server gets established automatically. Step 2 is different for Windows connections and for non-RDP connections, right? Let's consider two cases here. Case 1, sorry, choose the wrong color. Let's say case 1 for Windows connections. For Windows connections. For Windows connections, what happens usually? As soon as PSM Connect establishes the connection to the PSM server, step number two, step number two, PSM Connect launches the connection client. PSM Connect launches the connection client. What is connection client? A connection client is basically a software that is used to launch, that is used to initiate the connection to the target system, right? So in this particular case, the connection client is RDP client. Right? In this particular case, sorry, what happened? The connection client is RDP client. Connection client is RDP client. So RDP client is automatically launched during the connection workflow. Step number 2, PSM Connect launches the username and launches the connection client. Step number 3, username, IP address, password, all these details are retrieved from the vault. How does the retrieval happen? Which user allows the PSM to interact with the vault? That's something we will talk about in a bit. So username, IP address, passwords are retrieved from the vault connection to the target server system established. Okay. What usually happens here after the PSM Connect launches the connection client? Okay, after the PSM Connect launches the connection client, automatically IP address, username, and password will be retrieved. Yeah, will be automatically entered, connect button will be automatically pressed. All the processes that you do manually will happen on the backend automatically inside the privilege session manager. Connect button will automatically be pressed and the connection to the target system will be launched. Okay. Once the connection client is launched, the username, password, and password IP address that was retrieved from the vault by PSM automatically gets entered and connection button will be pressed. The connection to the target system will be established. Okay. This is how straightforward it is for Windows. But for non-RDP client, this is not the straightforward process. Case 2, for any non-RDP client, okay, Linux for non-RDP clients. Let's say PuTTY, right? Databases, databases client, right? Or even the websites, Chrome or Internet Explorer, for all non-RDP client. For all non-RDP client, step 2 is that a duplicate user will be created. Duplicate user called shadow user will be created for every individual user initiating the connection. Right? Every individual initiating the connection, a duplicate user called shadow user will be created. So let's say if this is user 1, when the user one logged into the PVW initiated the connection, for user one, a duplicate user called shadow user gets created. Okay? Let's call it shadow user one. Shadow user one. The only responsibility for the shadow user, the only responsibility of the shadow user is it is used to initiate the connection client. Okay? Shadow user one is responsible to initiate the connection client. Responsible to initiate the connection client. What does this mean? Let's say there is a connection client installed on the PSM server. On the PSM server, if I right click on this connection client software, remote desktop connection software, if I right click on this, it gives me an option to run as administrator. It gives me an option to run as administrator. Right? Gives me an option to run as administrator. This means that it is allowing me to run this connection client as a different user, not the user that I've logged into this machine, this laptop, okay? A different user. So on the PSM server, on the connection workflow, the connection is getting established using the PSM Connect user, but the connection client is being run as a different user called shadow user. Okay? The connection client is being run as a different user called shadow user. That is the only difference we have in the Windows and non RDP client or non-Windows connections. Right? So why do we have an extra step here? On the Windows, it was very simple that the PSM Connect itself was launching the connection client. Why do we need a separate user just to launch the connection client? Okay? Again, connection client is the software that is used to connect to the target systems. Right? So why do we need a separate user, a dedicated user just to initiate the connection client for non-RDP connection? The answer is to take the isolation into an advanced level. Okay? To isolate the information between two users. Usually what happens when you log into a server, okay? When you log into a server and you open a client, let's take an example of Chrome. Right? Let's take an example of Chrome. Right? I'm logged into this Chrome. I'll try to access any website here. Okay? This is going to track my history, track my bookmarks, track my registry settings, all those kind of history settings. It's going to save. Okay, right? All the non-RDP clients are going to have this tendency. Not only Chrome browser, Internet Explorer browser, even the Oracle client or database client are going to save some information every time a user logs in. So in this particular case, if the user one is logging into the PVWA and initiating the connection, right? Let's say a database client is launched here by user one. A database client is being launched by the user one, okay? Or any non-RDP client. Just taking an example of the database client. Okay? This DB client, or let's say the non-RDP clients like Chrome, right? They can save some uh, cached password, right? They have some ability to cache some details, passwords, local password within the application or within the client. Okay? Let's say history, bookmarks, right? Bookmarks, all those kind of details can be saved for user one. Okay? When the user one initiated the connection, since the PSM Connect is being used to launch the connection to the PSM server, user one has used the administrator account to connect to this PSM server. The connection client that was launched by the PSM Connect, let's assume if the PSM Connect is initiating the connection client, right? If the same user is initiating the connection client on this server, all the data was saved for user one. Okay? Now, if the user two logs in, let's say the user two, if the user two logs in, what happens here? User two logs in using the same process. User 2 initiates the connection to the target system. The connection goes through the PSM server, and thus PSM Connect is again launching the connection client. The same set of details that the user 1 had will be visible to user 2, right? Within a server, if you are logging in with the same credential, the server does not recognize you, right? The server assumes that your the old session that was there is going to be resumed. So that means all the details that user 1 has saved on the connection client will be visible for user 2. For example, let's say if I initiate the Chrome here, I try to write anything, I try to save some bookmark, I try to save something. uh, any other user uses my credential to log into the my laptop, okay, they will be able to see all these bookmarks and all the history, right? They will be able to see all the bookmarks and all the history. So this is where information between two users can overlap. Okay? Information between two users can overlap. Sorry. Information between two users can overlap if the same user ID is being used to launch the connection client every single time. So this is where, to prevent that from happening, shadow users will be created. For user 1, we'll have a separate user that's going to launch the client. For user 2, we'll have a separate shadow user that is going to launch the connection client. Since the connection client is launched by two separate users, okay, since the connection client is launched by two separate users, this connection client will not be able to show this user's details to this, right? Every single time the connection client will be launched by separate user. Okay? User 1 will have their own session, user 2 will have their own session. Okay? And since the connection client is being launched by two separate user, the information like cached passwords or history or bookmarks or registry settings will not be applied to user 2 or will not be visible for user 2. Okay? User 2 will have a fresh session of this Chrome, right? If I open the Chrome using the new incognito window, or maybe let's say even by using another user, it's not, it would not be able to track the history of the last user that used the connection client. So two separate user will be launched to initiate. Individual users will be created called shadow users. They will be able they will be used to launch the connection client. This is where this history, password, and all those kind of details will not overlap between two user sessions. Okay, that's what we want to isolate. Okay, information between two sessions should not be overlapped. Even if they are using the same credential to log into the target system, the information in the local client should not be cached and visible to other users. That's the goal. Okay. So once the connections are established, okay, once the connections are established, there is another internal user called PSM Admin Connect. Okay. Internal users are very important for any um, CyberArk component. We have some internal users. For PVWA, we have the PVWA app user and gateway user. For PSM, we have the password manager. For CPM, we have the password manager, and for PSM, we have Connect and Admin Connect as a local user. Okay. PSM Connect and PSM Admin Connect. As soon as the connection to the target system is established, the PSM Admin Connect user is basically an internal user slash system account created during the created locally on the PSM server during the PSM installation. Created locally on the PSM server during the PSM installation, and it is responsible to initiate the session recordings. Responsible to initiate the session recordings. That's what PSM Admin Connect does. That's the only functionality, right? There are internal users are very important. There are two additional users in the workflow. Okay. For the PSMs to be allowed to interact with the CyberArk vault, right? After launching the connection client, the IP address, username, and password needs to be retrieved from the CyberArk vault. So for PSM to interact with the CyberArk vault and retrieve the details from the vault, there are two internal users that gets created on the vault during PSM installation. Let's talk about them as well. The first internal user we have here is PSM app user. PSM app user is basically an internal user created on the vault during the PSM installation, responsible to retrieve platform, save, user authorization, all those details CyberArk vault from the vault, right? Why does PSM needs to know all these details? Why does PSM needs to know all the details? Because if let's say the account belongs to the Windows server, the PSM has to launch the RDP client. The account belongs to Linux server, Linux platform. It has to initiate the SSH client, right? So for different type of operating system belonging to different platforms, PSM has to follow different set of processes, and it needs to know which platform the account belongs to. Does the user have proper authorization on the accounts or not? So all those information will be retrieved from the vault by this PSM app user. Okay. The PSM app user will retrieve all the details from the vault, and we have one more user called PSM gateway user. Just like we had the PWA app user and gateway user, we have the PSM app and gateway user as well. PSM gateway user is basically the internal user, again the user created on the vault during the PSM installation, responsible for retrieving the user credentials, sorry, the privileged credentials in order to establish connections to the target system. Username and password will be retrieved. The sensitive information will be retrieved by the gateway user in order to establish connections to the target system. This entire process that we just discussed, all the user sees is that they log into the PBWA and they click on the connect button, provide the IP address, and automatically the connection to the target system is established. But on the backend, all these workflows are going on. Okay? So this entire thing that we just discussed are called backend session workflow. Okay? Backend session workflow. Sometimes interviewers ask this type of question. They might be uh, they might ask you to explain this entire workflow in brief. So very important to understand.